I've made the argument that we're not alone, and I've made that argument for 4 years. I've stood my ground on that argument, and I've defended my space on that argument, and I've won on that argument. I've made the point that the information that has been released from the standpoint of mainstream media is sufficient to make that case. The data, excuse me, that is being displayed, the images that were being seen, the conversations that are being had by people that were on the ground, or for that matter, on the ships, or for that matter, in the airplanes, makes it very clear that there is some level of technology that seems to be interacting with us in some particular way, even if it's something where we're now being able to, we're more aware of, because technology has gotten to the level where we can be more aware of it. More importantly, like I said, it's what people say. It's the recounting of this. It's the military personnel coming out saying, I saw this. I observed this. It came out of the water. There was a bubbling of it. I was in the airplane, just like I was in the airplane on 9/11. And I watched it for multiple 5 minutes. It's knowing that the members of our Congress are being briefed, and that after they're being briefed, there are eye-popping briefings like, oh my God, and they're seeing things that we are not able to see, even with the 3 videos that we find out that the Pentagon released. Well, Luisa Elizondo, the one who was running the Black Budget Project studying UFOs, a small portion of that, by the way, Black Budget Project studying UFOs, comes out and says, we are not alone, when asked the question of whether it's ours, and makes the point based on my scientific observation, and that includes not just videos, but that's evidence that goes beyond that. Whatever the hell that means, Louise, if you ever want to come on to the show, have a conversation, I would love to have a talk about it. But whatever that means, they have more. There's something there. And you can make a case that says, well, wait a minute, what if it's us? Fair enough. Let's just be clear, though, that we are talking about something, and we're moved past this conversation about these people are seeing swamp gas. That's my point. That's the definitive point that I want to make. It's either us or it's not. And I'm in mind that it's a little bit of both. I have no issue with the belief that we were able to stumble upon some aspect of technology or some aspect of physics or some aspect of science, and as a secondary project that was able to take that and run with it, so much so that we were able to exploit that changeover. Let's say it was just the use of gravity, using electricity to manage gravity. What would that look like? Would that look like our technology, or would it look like something else? The capabilities of the craft, would it look like our technology or something else? If that craft was moving not just on typical propulsion in the way that something will be pushed out of a craft in order to make it go forward, was basically manipulating gravity itself to move around, to zigzag from point A to point B. A pilot, under the normal guidelines in which we look at this stuff, would say everybody in that craft would have been crushed by G-forces. That's assuming that it was using typical propulsion. I am not entirely pushed away by that particular mindset. I just want to make the point that it is something. They aren't making this up. There's something that these guys are encountering, and I'm of mind that it's not us. Ratcliffe, who's making the point of saying there's a ton of information. DNI, former DNI, Director of National Intelligence. Fox News asked about this. And on national television, he is perfectly confident, where he is not bothered by this issue. That's how much this world has changed over the course of the last 3 or 4 years. The world has changed in an instant. Marco Rubio comes out, talks about it. Other senators will come out and talk about it, and they would say, yes, I've gotten briefed. And they would make the point that we don't know what this is. Rubio goes so far as to say, I hope it is not us. Because if somewhere has access to technology that is allowing that craft, those things to do what we're seeing them do, we're screwed. Oh, it's fascinating. It's terrifying on some level also. Keep in mind, from my standpoint, there's only action and consequence, and there are things that the action and consequence act upon. Meaning, I don't believe for a moment that there is any God that will save us if we fuck up in an international incident or an exoplanetary incident with a foreign intelligence. Nor do I believe for a moment that this is going to be entirely nonpartisan. Think about that. Politics, from a scale that goes beyond planet, that is partisan. We want to get the technology to do X. We want to get the weapons to do X. What happens when that becomes not international? What happens when it's acknowledged? What happens if the Senate or the Congress and the report that they come up with in Congress say we are not alone? What does that mean? Have you thought about that? Have you thought about the implications from the standpoint of international relations between Russia, China, the United States, when it's accepted that we're not alone? And not just that, if the United States is having these reports, if the military is working with a UFO organization, which it is, by the way, to the Stars Academy, if the Navy is coming out and saying, yeah, we were seeing these things, and this stuff was coming out of the water and stuff like that, which they are, and if they're indeed changing the rule set, again, which they are, if Congress is getting briefed, which they are, and if they're making the point of, look, what are the physics, the quantum mechanics, you need to explain this. If Congress is basically hitting the military saying you need to explain this, that report could potentially come back and say we're not alone. And if the United States has access to what seems to be equipment, if indeed there have been crashes and retrievals of those crashes, if indeed they have investigations into the human faculty, what happens to a human being when they're encountering these devices or encountering whatever it is that's on these devices, and there's all sorts of items that are on the record, researched, showing that the human faculty can be greatly affected by these encounters. What does it mean? And if the U.S. is doing this, are we to believe that China doesn't have access to this stuff? Russia doesn't have access to this stuff? The old Soviet Union? Are we honestly going to believe that? Meaning, why the radio silence? Why is it just the United States that's talking about this? Brazil, Operation Saucer, for example. Brazil's military, their Air Force, investigated a UFO, a rash of UFOs that were attacking some of the residents in Brazil. No shit. You can look on the Brazilian website, on the government's website. It's their research. They go investigate for months. They're seeing craft. They're seeing lesions. They're seeing radiation burns. They're seeing basically the same things that the people were saying. The guy who exposed that has a tell-all to the UFO magazine and ends up offing himself, or supposedly offing himself, several months later after making that tell-all interview. Pictures, images, all sorts of these things have been basically put into the black, especially some of the footage. My point is, they investigated it. It was there. And why the radio silence from other larger nations like Russia and China? Fascinated. I'm curious by it. That's all. Fmr DNI Ratcliffe is going to tell you basically that there are loads of stuff behind the scenes. And further, that he was trying to get that information out. And whatever that congressional report come out with, I don't believe for a moment that everything in that report is going to be true and honest. And I don't believe for a moment that that is not going to be used for manipulation of the public. And that's the worst aspect of getting that report, because it's something that I wanted, and I don't believe for a moment it's going to be what I want. Let's play the clip of Ratcliffe.
Without a sonic boom. So in short, things that we are observing that are difficult to explain. And so, there's actually quite a few of those, and I think that information is being gathered and will be put out in a way that the American people can see. We always, when we see these things, Maria, we always look for a plausible explanation. Weather can cause disturbances, visual disturbances. Sometimes we wonder whether or not our adversaries have technologies that are a little bit further down the road than we thought or that we realized. But there are instances where we don't have good explanations for some of the things that we've seen. And, when that information becomes declassified, I'll be able to talk a little bit more about that.
Can you tell us where it was seen?
Actually, all over the world. There have been sightings all over the world. And when we talk about sightings, the other thing I will tell you is it's not just a pilot or just a satellite or some intelligence collection. Usually we have multiple sensors that are picking up these things. And so, again, some of this are just they're unexplained phenomenon. And there's actually quite a few more than have been made public. So I think it'll be healthy for as much of this information to get out there as possible so that the American people can see.
He is wasted on you, Bartiromo. He is wasted on you. Ask better questions. Yes, it's all over the world. What you need to do is get more specific with your question and nail down. In fact, take him down a pathway where he basically has to say, I can't answer the very specific question, which at the very least gives you an idea that there was an air there. It's like throwing powder on the invisible man. No, you can't necessarily see that the fact that the guy is invisible. You don't know if he's black, white, gay, straight, whatever other physical attributes, but you knew that there's a guy there. Knowing that is important in and of itself. Where did you track these? Oh, there's all sorts of radar all around the world. Is there any specific place? I mean, many of these craft are small, okay? Well, if they're small like this, I mean, either they're drones or, for the most part, let's not say that there's something in it, but if there is an occupant in the way that they talk about it in technology, it seems that these craft would need some larger place of origin. Either they're coming from somewhere else or they're here. Which one is it? Is he going to say, I can't answer that? That's the interesting question. In fact, you could follow up on that. There's evidence that some of the craft are coming from the water, for example, of the Nimitz. With these craft being so small, do you believe that there's a base either nearby or on planet Earth, for example, underwater? And is there evidence of such? Is he going to say no to that? He can't say no to that because the evidence is already out there. And Bigelow, the guy who basically did the project, has already basically said it's true. Bigelow had people who were on the Nimitz who probably wasn't supposed to be disclosing that stuff to Bigelow. But at that point, Bigelow had special access, part of the Special Access Project. He had, he was in the project himself. So she told him, it came out the water. It looked like there was a structure down there when it popped up. So either he is going to lie to me, he's going to say, I can't answer that, or is he going to say yes? From the standpoint of yes, when you guys are tracking this, do you believe that you know where they're coming from, if indeed you believe that there's a base somewhere on the planet or nearby? Well, he's never going to answer that, but at the very least, I want him to say, I can't answer that. If the answer was no, he would just say no, all things being equal. I don't know. I guess there are ways to drill down to hit these guys. And sometimes people who are not UFO people, when they answer, they're wasted. Ratcliffe is wasted on Botaromo. Join me, Ratcliffe. Join me. I would even keep it just the UFOs. I would even ask you about the stuff that took place in the Trump era. I'd just keep it the UFOs. Join me. I'm going to leave it here. I've been right all this time. I've been right. And there have been people who've pushed back on me who didn't necessarily want to accept my correctness all of these years. But at this point, there is overwhelming evidence that I was entirely, completely, 1,000% right. And all of my detractors for all of these years that I've pushed this particular subject have been wrong. That congressional report is not going to give an honest accounting. I don't believe for a moment that it's going to tell everything. What I do hope is that it legitimizes the issue in a way that makes it extraordinarily clear that there's a there. And honestly, I got to be honest, at this point, I don't know how they back away from this. For God's sake, the former director of national intelligence is basically saying there's a ton of evidence. We can't explain it. We don't know what it is. And we have other members basically saying, God, I hope that's not us. God, I hope that's not us. If the Russians got their hands on that, we're screwed. They're seeing technology. I'm not against these guys potentially seeing some kind of environmental phenomena. And even Jacques Vallée's argument that it's more complicated than the UFOs. But this kind of gets to Occam's razor. Am I going to accept that God is interacting, or something is interacting with humanity in order to push humanity along? That's one thought, that we have some kind of imp interacting with humanity for various reasons. Or they could be beings similar to us that look up into their cosmos when they reach a certain point and realizing that they themselves are on a ball hurling through space. And as such, one of them looks at their moon, looked at their sun, looks at something and wonder, are we alone? Is there something else out there that is perception, that has the ability to interact with its world? We are thrust into something to which we don't know what. Everything is, for the most part, relative from the standpoint of our direction. Where are we? We have no idea. And where are we in the cosmos? Yeah, I do think, similar to us, that something can ask that exact same question, and it's not shocking or weird that they would. Depending upon where they are, depending upon their technology, even depending upon what they had from their material resources, meaning the things that are on the scale, the elemental scale. All of those things could directly affect how they propagated as a species and whether or not, and for that matter, how long they've been a spacefaring civilization. I think that seems to be more simplistic as opposed to trying to add an imp or some kind of seemingly magical being into the mix. I'm not beyond this notion that there could be multiple dimensions or interdimensional beings and all that stuff. Fair enough. But if you're asking me, what seems to be the most straightforward explanation. It just seems to be that beings, just like us, with the capacity of thought and mind, and the capacity to put that thought and mind into practice by using technology to affect its will, and this place, leave our planet, go into other planets, go into our solar system to figure out what's out there and take pictures and take images, and one day ourselves going out there. I don't think we're alone in that. If we have consciousness and other beings have the light of consciousness, I don't think we're alone in it. So that's my hypothesis. And the congressional report is going to come out with something. I am looking forward to that report. And again, I think people really need to wrap their heads around what it means. If that report, the United States government comes out and says, we are not alone, we need to deal with that. I have no idea what that means. I don't know what that means internationally. I don't know what that means from the standpoint of even this country, the way we see ourselves on this planet, and the way we see ourselves in the cosmos. All of those things need to be grappled with. None of those things are. We try to do it here. Like, share, and of course, subscribe. Thanks all.